Hi, welcome back to Spring CS170. We're picking up with the rest of the topics for this week. So we're on to passwords. I'm not going to really go into some of the stuff that you look at in terms of what is a safe password. I would just note that there are different types of things that are happening with technology right now, which probably would essentially eliminate the need for passwords, right? So to moving on to other types of ways to authenticate people, right? So uh, let me just step back a second. What does authenticate mean? So, you go to wherever, right? You want to sign on to whatever website to access a certain service. And there's a couple different things that they want to do. First and foremost, they want to identify, are you the right person, right? It's not someone else that's impersonating you to steal your money out of your bank account or something like that, right? So before they allow someone to access, whatever information, your account balance, wire your money or whatever, they need to verify that you are who you say you are. So that's what authentication means, right? So that's what the password is supposed to do. It could also be just to access your own computer, right? And so, or your phone, right? As you all probably know. So there is the password. Sometimes there's the PIN, right? That people are using to identify or authenticate who you are. But I think more uh, evolution of this is going on to the point where, you probably wouldn't be using your passwords to authenticate you, right? And you can see authentication as a word down here. Um, so, things like, biometrics, right? To look at things that are unique to you from a biological standpoint, um, to authenticate, as passwords, there's all kinds of issues with passwords. So we'll get to that, but, you know, uh, you know, what is a safe password? Each of the different websites, they probably ask for some different things, but generally they're going to be looking for things where you don't do something crazy like put in your password as 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 or something like that, right? Or uh, your name or whatever, right? All kinds of like very obvious things you shouldn't name your password. So, some of the websites will vary as to what they'll take as like a secure password, but generally most websites now are requiring some sort of like complex password, right? Whether it's like varying the case in your, let's say your letters, right? So lowercase a, uppercase a, let's say, mixing in numbers, um, putting in like special characters uh, and whatnot, right? So, but you can look at this place right here, how secure is my password.net, to get a feel for how secure is your password. But those are kind of like rule of thumb things you can look at on quote unquote having a secure password. Okay. And this idea of two-factor authentication, probably most of you are seeing this right now, especially if you're doing stuff with online banking and whatnot. Generally, uh, it's something that's pretty widespread in more recent times, where you do your sign in, and then above and beyond that, they'll send a text or email to you, and then you have to act on that. So that's why it's called two-factor authentication. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be an email or a text, but that's just an example that most of you have probably been exposed to. Okay, all right. So the next idea is the idea of phishing, right? Phishing spelled like this: phishing attacks, right? So what is that? So you probably have seen a lot of these different types of things where someone sends you an email, they want you to click on it, right? Or even like on a website, you see something, uh, and essentially whoever sent you that message or provided you that website wants you to click on it, right? Like clickbait, right? So they want you to click on it. Why do they want you to click on it? Could be any number of reasons why they want you to click on it, right? But, you know, let's say you're on your own computer at home and you click on something, and that's going to basically download um, something malicious onto your computer, right? Could be malware. It could, right? And malware covers all kinds of stuff, whether it's something that will monitor uh, your keystrokes, something that will scan your computer, something that will hijack your computer. All of those things are potential possibilities with these phishing attacks. So the main premise here is that they want you to open the email. Let's say it's an email. It doesn't have to be email, right? But let's say it's an email and you click on it. And the minute you click on it, like all kinds of bad things will start to happen, right? Whether it's to install something bad on your computer or your phone, or to suck information out, right? It could be any number of information. It could be password, it could be personal information, whatever, right? So there's any number of bad things, right? But the basic idea, the premise is that they want you to click on something, right? So they send something to you via email or have something on the website, a pop-up, right? Pops up, you click on it, and it's like game over, right? Until like you totally wipe the whole computer, and even then you might not get rid of it. So that's the idea of phishing attacks. I don't really want to go into like a whole bunch of detail with it, but if you have more questions regarding what is phishing attacks and some of the telltale signs and whatever, right? I'm certain you can find it on the internet. You can email me. I can go into more detail, but that's basically the idea of what phishing attacks are. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. I realize I've been pumping out a lot of videos from a duration standpoint, so I want to make sure I don't hold you guys up for more than the time for this week. Okay, so I need to pick up the pace a little bit. So protecting intellectual property, right? This is a big issue, and it's an ongoing type of thing on how do we deal with that. So you can imagine, right, and you've probably seen it in the news, whatever intellectual property, doesn't have to be an artist, right? But in this case, they're talking about artists. Uh, so whether I'm a programmer, I write some code, or I'm a musician, I put out some music, or an artist, whatever, right? You want to be you want to be rewarded for those type of things that you produce, and you also want to maybe control how those things are being used beyond what you intended for it, right? So let's say you created a painting, right? It's like something you spent like a whole bunch of time on. You really like it. Maybe it's painting of like someone in your family or whatever, right? It's something very personal to you as an artist, right? You sold the copy of that painting to whoever, and then next thing you know, someone has taken that painting and um, altered it. Maybe they, you know, they changed the image slightly, and then turn around and sold it to make some money. Uh, you're probably not going to be very happy about that because that original painting was essentially yours, right? But someone has gone on to either make copies of it. Uh, and so this is beyond someone making a copy for their own personal benefit, but it's also someone turning around for profit uh, to turn around and sell whatever your product is, right? You as the original artist are not going to be very happy about that, right? Let's say they altered that image to something you totally like are against, right? That whole idea. Again, that's the idea of protecting your intellectual property, right? So things like that don't happen, right? That's the aspiration right now. In this day and age, it's very difficult to protect those things, but that's the idea of protecting your intellectual property. Whether you're an artist, you're a software developer, anything you put your your brain into, right, to do something. um, you want to have some control over that, how other people can profit from it, how other people um, can get access to it, how other people may build on top of it or change it. um, you want some say into that, you want some control over that, right? So this is the idea of protecting intellectual property, right? So uh, I, you can see the bullet points here. I don't know if I had to, reiterate all of these, right? Like I just mentioned, it's about creative process, right? Coming from whoever individual. And then, the idea that this information is owned, right? And, how do you protect that? Okay. Right, so these are the different types of licenses. I mean, this is kind of general like concepts of it. Um, and you can go into a whole bunch of detail about it, but you should just try to understand like at least a high level concepts on this, right? And we'll kind of step into this, right? But you know, uh, like down here where it says sharing and copying and open and proprietary licenses, you can kind of see some examples here. You can probably build up your own examples too, right? Something you probably want to do in terms of preparing for the final exam is to have like different types of examples for these different software license agreements. Okay, so let's move forward on this. So open source software, okay? Uh, in contrast to proprietary software. So proprietary software, I give you a good example would be Microsoft Office, right? Microsoft would have that intellectual property because they spent a long time over many years to build up Microsoft Office. They continue to support it and they make money from selling it to corporations, to Rutgers, whoever, right? So they're basically controlling it. They're controlling like all the features that will go in there and changes to it and stuff like that. Now that's kind of a evolving type of situation where Microsoft is actually looking opportunistically. I mean, they control a whole bunch of software, right? But there's aspects where they are looking to contribute the source code into open source, right? And then that allows other people to make contributions, make changes to it, whatever, right? But in general, the Microsoft is an example of proprietary software, right? Apple, right? So their operating system and whatnot is another example of proprietary software, right? So, Apple philosophically is very much into controlling their ecosystem, right? They're not going to really want people to make changes to that. They control the ecosystem, and then people play in their ecosystem. That's the general idea. So that's what proprietary software would look like. Now, open source software, there's actually flavors or variations of this, but the general idea is that you put something out there. Let's say we're talking about Wikipedia, that anyone can contribute. It's not one person or entity who's controlling it, what goes in, what goes out, stuff like that, right? That doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. It doesn't mean like everyone can willy-nilly just jam whatever they want out there. There is some sort of gatekeeper process, right? Governance around it. But the idea is that people contribute to open source software. They see opportunities to make it better. They'll put the information in there, or they'll put the software out, the code out there, and stuff like that. And it's made available to the wider public. Okay. And then just to extend on this a little bit, open source software doesn't mean that people can't make money from it, right? So I'll give an example. I don't know how many people can really understand this, but Linux, right, being one of the open source things that I mentioned earlier in one of the other lectures. Yeah, like all kinds of people might use Linux, right? But there's also different versions of Linux, right? So there's the base or open source version. But let's say you have a company that comes along and says, hey, I can use the components of Linux and build on top of it and make sure I'm always compatible to it. So people, make some changes or whatever, I keep up to date with those changes. But on top of that, I'll provide like some utilities or some convenience type of stuff, some packaging stuff. I'll make it more secure for enterprise or whatever, right? So you build another layer on top of this open source software, and then you package it up and you can sell it to other people. That is allowed, right? You can do stuff like that, right? So you as a vendor can provide value added services on top of the open source software, right? That's okay. So there are different types of opportunities to do that, right? And I'd say Linux is one of those type of examples. So I don't want to go into a huge amount of detail because that's kind of getting into like some sort of more nuanced details on this, which maybe is beyond the scope of this class. But this is the idea of open source, right? A lot of people contributing to it. It's freely available, and it's just a model of how we can distribute intellectual property, okay, or manage intellectual properties, I should say. All right, so we're talking about copyrights. So as you can imagine, right, if someone writes something, right, they write a book, or in this case, they're talking about a web page, create a sculpture, create a painting, whatever, that's their work, right? Like it came from their head, right? They produced that, right? And they have a copyright on that work, right? And so a copyright would protect these following things. So these are bullet points you should probably make a note of. And I kind of alluded to it earlier in this video, right? So of course, just standalone copying of that work, right? You're getting protection for that. Creating a derivative work, which is exactly what I mentioned before, where you take, let's say, whatever painting it is, and then you just make a small change to it. Maybe you add something on top of it, or you alter something. You still started with something. You started with this intellectual property that doesn't belong to you, and you made a change to it. So there needs to be some sort of agreement before you can make that derivative work, okay? And then if someone wants to take to like distribute this to essentially make money from it, right? So if, let's say, Amazon takes your book and it's going to publish your book out there for you, and then publicly perform or display the work, right? So take your painting and display it, let's say art gallery, or play it over some sort of channel or whatever. Right, so these are the different types of copyrights, well, in the context of like the web. So you can do this, right? You can like read it, view it. Let's say it's a piece of audio, then you can listen to it, okay? And so that's called free personal use, right? Fair use, right? This is something generally you can go ahead and use this, let's say for educational purposes, review or criticism, right? If it were me, I would say like the fair use, you should still give credit to where you source the material from. But this is the idea of fair use, okay? And both of these cases, whether it's free for personal use or for fair use, it's not like you're trying to make a whole bunch of money from it. You're not trying to package something up, turn around and sell it to the whole world, right? To make money off of it. It's well, the lack of a better word, fair use, right? So you want to be careful on these type of things, right? And then public domain, there's no rights on it. It's free for anyone to use in any form, and you treat the information as your own, right? So this could extend to stuff that's been out there for a long time, and you can build on it. Again, you know, if I'm using it, even though it's considered public domain and there's no rights on it, right? Usually it's something like where it's been out there for a long time, uh, and then you can access to it. I think you probably would still refer to it, and provide some credit to the original author, right? But yeah, it's considered public domain at that point. You can take it, you can do whatever you want with it, essentially. Okay. Okay, so this is another interesting idea, which is a common one, Creative Commons license, right? So this is kind of maybe the aspirational goal where a lot of people try to get to with this thing. So, you know, it's more open, right? When they say like a Creative Commons license, I would say this is probably more open. So the author, gives the people the right to share, use, and build on that work, right? So they're basically sharing uh, that properties, kind of almost like akin to like the open source idea, right? So you kind of put it out there and you allow people to kind of build on it and leverage it, change it, and whatever, right? Uh, and like I said, the goal here is to allow people to work in an open way. So it's kind of very similar to the idea of open source, right? So people are working together. You're not really holding on to it and say, yeah, no one else can touch my work or something like that. Um, and so they can copy and distribute it without contacting the creator. Okay. So this is the idea of Creative Commons license. And these are the attributes underneath the Commons license. Again, you should probably make a note of this, right? So you have you can copy, you can distribute, tweak it, do whatever. But note the point in red here. Credit is given. Okay, that's kind of important. And I think, to be fair, like that just sounds like the right thing to do, right? So yeah, this point in red here is kind of important. It's actually very important. Okay, so Creative Commons, like I said, it's very close to open source in the principle or the thinking about it. I think it's only fair that you say credit is given, right? So this is important in terms of the attribution side of things. And then here's the idea of like, you turning around and making money on it. Um, this is something, again, that's kind of fair, right? Like, me as an artist putting something out there, and then people doing whatever with it. We're trying to be an open community here, right? But if someone turns around and says, yeah, I'm going to make some money off of this, right, and do whatever, then I think, not to say you can't do it, but at least there should be some discussion with the producer of this work. So that's why, like, when you work under that license, you're not doing this from a commercial. You should not be looking at this commercially. If you're someone who didn't create the original content, right? If you want to try to do something commercial off of it, then that should be negotiated directly with the producer of this IP. When I say IP, I mean the intellectual property. Okay, so derivative work. Derivative work is to, again, you're taking something, and you know you're totally, like, essentially uh, you know using 99% of it or something like that, um, and just making some small change to it. Okay, so if you want to just say, well, here's the transcript, I mean, not the transcript, the essay or the painting or whatever, uh, and say, yeah, this is what it is, and then pass it on as a copy to other people to work off of. That's great, right? But if you go in there and you make a small change to the point where the author did not intend for that. I think, again, that's similar to the commercial aspect. I think that should be negotiated and communicated with the original author of the intellectual property, right? Because maybe the author doesn't like you doing that, right? It totally goes against their principle or whatever, right? So again, the Creative Commons license allows you to take that work and use it to distribute it or whatever, but don't make any changes to it, right? That's why this part is in red. These are verbatim. Verbatim means exactly the same, okay? And then this is just basically passing on the license, right? So to make sure that the license is the same. You can't change the license if you're starting off with the intellectual property license that you started with. Someone else can't take it, do a derivative, and then come up with a new license. So these are the 4 points on the Creative Commons license you should make a note of, and presumably be ready to address these if they're raised up on the exam. Okay. All right, we're getting to the end here. I know we've covered a lot of, in terms of duration of these videos for only one of the chapters, right? So copyright material is basically talks about copyright material and just some concepts around that, right? So you have like, for basically not for commercial, right? So a nonprofit, you're not using this to profit. And you want to get written permission from the author, right? Whoever gave you whoever produced the IP, the intellectual property, and make sure credit is given to them. That's only fair. And you only do without permission in limited circumstances. I don't even know, like on this one, like, does this really matter? I would just say, if you know it's copyrighted, then it's better safe than sorry, and just go with trying to get permission, right? So this point D, I'm not really sure you really need to think too much about this. Just be conservative and just say, if you're going to be reusing this, give the owner the credit, and get permission and whatnot. Okay. And then this is a point about we know what can be copyrighted, right? Like something that came from your head, your creative idea or whatever, your intellectual property, that can be copyrighted. So what can't be copyrighted? Well, facts, right? The sky, well, I shouldn't say the sky is blue, but okay, whatever is a fact, right? The force of gravity on Earth, right? That can't be copyrighted, right? That's a fact. That's a statement of fact, right? I have an opinion about something. Yeah, well, that's my opinion, right? So that's not going to be copyrighted, okay? So new ideas, old ideas, right? That's not going to be copyrighted per se, right? And so then what is intellectual property? I think, like I mentioned before, typical things would be like paintings, music, could be like, some essays that you wrote, could be like a book, it could be like video content, painting, whatever you did, software code that you wrote, all those type of things. Okay. All right. So that's it for now. A little bit later on, I'll work on some stuff to go into the next chapter for this week. Until then, hopefully this keeps you going for a bit. Thank you.